Up next, we have Dr. Narcisa Pricope, and she is a professor of applied geography in the Department of Earth and Ocean Sciences at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's also program director of UNCW's externally accredited Geospatial Intelligence Certificate. While at UNCW, Dr. Pricope was the first advocate for the inception of a drone program aimed at training students for a burgeoning industry and utilizing the emerging technology on various research applications. Since then, she has offered one of the first graduate courses in aerial drone applications in geosciences in the UNC system and has garnered over $500,000 in research funding that leverages the power of UAS and remote sensing technologies for a wide range of applications. She received a PhD from the University of Florida in Geography and Environmental Engineering in 2011, a Master's of Science degree in Geoscience from Western Kentucky University in 2006, and a double bachelor's degree in Geography and English from Romania's flagship research university, Babeș.
Sorry, Babeș-Bolyai. That's probably good. You can stop. I didn't realize she was going to read all of that. All right, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here, and thank you for that introduction. As you pointed out, I am very passionate about UAS applications, and I started that program at UNCW, and I'm proud to announce that we are, as of August, the only university in the state that is part of the FAA UAS Collegiate Training Initiative, and I'm leading that as well. So we are excited about that, and that funding amount has now surpassed $2 million because we just received a huge award from the National Science Foundation to start a coastal UAS observatory at UNCW. So we're, in addition to what I'll be talking about today, we'll have multispectral, hyperspectral, topobathymetric LiDAR, some amazing capabilities, and all of those are intended to allow us to partner with community members and to do cool applications. Not to take business away from anybody, but if you want to do a research spin or try something out, come to us and we can work with you. So the talk I'll be giving today results from a project funded by the NC Department of Transportation that ended in December of this past, so in January really of this year. And that project allowed us to purchase a LiDAR about right before the pandemic, so early 2020. So a UAV born LiDAR, and with that, we've been able to conduct a lot of interesting research. Specifically, we were working for that project with the Environmental Analysis Unit at the DOT, and their interest was in basically assessing the ability of UAV born LiDAR collections to better predict wetland types. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And what we did is we fused LiDAR data with multispectral data collected on multiple UAS platforms, and then assessed their ability to predict wetland type and location. And of course, you see some of my co-authors on there. So I'll be moving through this fairly quickly. That's a bit of a slow one. Again, as I said, all of this was intended to look at wetland mapping, and one of the main reasons is that our national wetlands inventory, the wetland data that we have for the coast, is in some places 10 years or more outdated. So the NWI, if you go download the data, it's from about 2010, and it's highly outdated, especially in these coastal areas that change so fast. So probably don't need to tell people in this room why we do mapping of wetlands, right? A huge host of reasons. Ours was ultimately to improve our coastal resilience by protecting and understanding where wetlands are, how they're changing, and how we can better protect them. And again, the reason this project happened is because the DOT is aware of the time and financial cost of sending a team in the field to do wetland delineation. It's sometimes weeks. So it takes about 3 weeks to delineate about 200 acres of wetland, and it's several $1,000s. So they are heavily invested in UAS technology to try to reduce those costs. And also, as you also probably know, 79% roughly of our state, and especially the coastal plain, is wetlands, right? All sorts of different types of wetlands. So there's a big reason to be able to survey these wetlands and to survey them without having to try to physically walk through that. We have, we've run into an alligator here or there, some snakes, all the cool stuff that you can find in a wetland. But if you're in a UAV, you can just wave hello and they stay there. So typically, because these wetland areas are so hard to access and they're sometimes dangerous and time consuming, we have relied historically on remote sensing from satellites, which allow us to essentially classify the image based on these spectral signatures and images. And then there's been a lot of airborne based mapping, such as the NAIP that our coastal counties do all the time. But now more recently, unmanned, well, this should say uncrewed, unoccupied, because we were unwomaned aerial systems for the most part. Get it? Because I know I was lying, so I was anyways. And so we are able to acquire higher resolutions and really hopefully accurate wetland maps and fill that gap in between what remote sensing from satellites and airborne and what field mapping can give us. So what typically is used for wetland mapping are multispectral sensors and these light detection and LiDAR sensors. So thank you, Jeremy, for that awesome explanation, because now I don't have to do it. So I can just kind of zoom through my presentation because you did such a good job and you spent basically your whole talk explaining how the LiDAR collection works. So that was a really good explanation. I feel like I do not have to explain LiDAR, right? Okay. So multispectral, so we're essentially collecting reflectance values, right? So we're taking these multiple band pictures of the surface and then bringing those back and matching those values, those reflectance or brightness values to different types of vegetation, more or less. And then with LiDAR, we are able to produce these, and I have an animation here. These are active sensors as opposed to those multispectral, which are passive sensors, and they send out a laser beam, they collect that in return, and then we work with that to create digital elevation models, DSMs, and all the things that we need to look at hydrologic features, topographic features. So the main question we were asking with this project was, how well can we predict wetlands? How accurate are these delineations relative to ground data, relative to existing wetland data collected by the DOT and some of their weeks-long delineations? And then what are the most important variables? So if somebody wants to do this again, you don't have to go process all the 30 plus variables that we did, right? We can sort of summarize what those important variables are that predict wetland presence and type. Don't forget to breathe is what people tell me all the time. So let's breathe. All right, so these are the places, all the sites we surveyed. The project ran for about a year. So we surveyed across all of these areas, all the way from Jones County to Brunswick County. And some of these places you see on here, you may recognize. We surveyed locations of interest to the DOT, places that they had already paid a field team to go and make a wetland delineation, because we were using those delineations to then compare to our UAS data in addition to other field collected data to essentially determine how accurate our maps from UAS were. And I'll just give you you can leave, I'll just tell you right now, they were so good that the DOT took back the equipment that I had purchased with this contract because they want to use it themselves. So I guess it worked out. But we flew all over the place. We had some fun stories, a little drone accident here, there. No, it was minor. It was minor. So what happens when you let students practice with your drones? Sometimes they launch them straight into a tree. The fixed wings, and they recover well. The fixed wings, you'll see that they're fine. The big drone, and you'll ask me this, I'll tell you right up front, or I'll tell you when I get there. Yeah, the equipment was a bit expensive. So because of the time constraints, I'm only going to be showing you some results from 4 sites. I chose randomly, but not so randomly. I chose them basically because they were predominantly a certain wetland class, right? Because again, we were interested in seeing how well can we predict different wetland classes, which types of wetland classes, such as these estuarine intertidal emergent ones, the pilastrine forested, the emergent wetlands, the scrub wetlands. So which ones do these UAS LiDAR data especially do better at predicting? And what you're seeing on the screen are the outlines of the areas we flew with the actual NWI, the National Wetlands Inventory data shown as the classes, as the wetland classes. And so we collected, as I said, in the field, we collected UAS LiDAR data, UAS multispectral data, and then we used the National Wetlands Inventory data to help us sample in the field and collect additional habitat points, habitat data or reference data. And all of this, again, was done between 2020 and 2021. We also did a bunch of work actually comparing all of this to airborne LiDAR, and that actually a paper came out today, made my day, you know, wake up to that. So here's the equipment that we worked with, and I'm taking you back to the past because here Jeremy talked about, you know, real-time mapping, and we didn't do real-time mapping. This is static LiDAR, so we had a static survey going the whole time, which is this guy here, and a Trimble RTK. And then we had ground control points laid out strategically under flight lines for our UAS platform, which was a Quanergy M8 LiDAR flown on a Matrice 600. Goodbye to those platforms, they're no longer made. So, but we had some fun. And this platform, the LiDAR, the one that carried the LiDAR, was in total about $64,000. So every time this lady put up this equipment in the sky, my students know I would have a mini heart attack, you know, because it is. You're putting $64,000 into the sky, and I mean, you're not hoping for the best because you've really planned and done your homework, but you are kind of hoping for the best. I am proud to say we've had no accidents, and therefore the DOT took that equipment back 2 years later in perfect condition after all of these flights. So I'm actually kind of proud of that. And then we flew this baby, which was the EB Plus RTK. And I say was because this baby is no longer. One of my former students who is now happily employed at Esri crashed it into a wetland. And that was the end of that. So, you know, that's the beauty of of teaching while you're doing research, because this is research and teaching students. This project alone trained about 7 grad and undergrad students who are all off and doing great and got great jobs. Again, so we did GCP, we did a static survey, we did ground control points, and then we did checkpoints to do all of that. And then the reason we had to have so many grad students was because we needed a lot of hands in the field. And then after we'd be doing the flying, or while we would be doing the flying, we'd also be collecting these reference data, as I said, in the field to essentially train our imagery, because the ultimate goal was to create machine learning classifications to assess the accuracy of these maps, right? So we needed to have some reference data. We got as much as we could. We were always aiming high. But at the end of the day, it looks something like this because we could only access certain areas. And you can see they're not exactly balanced equally across the classes because most of these are impossible to access. So what we did do actually is we augmented what we collected in the field with 2020 NAPE imagery. So we created additional training data for the places we weren't able to access. I don't know why I have that twice. Okay, so here's a quick workflow for what I'll talk about today. We essentially, so I kind of walked you through how we collected both raw LiDAR data up there, left, raw multispectral data. We then PPK'd the multispectral data. So we and calculated a bunch of vegetation indices. And then with the Quanergy, I'll walk you through some of these steps a little bit. We collected these pool points, did all the processing that goes into making that. And then essentially extracted out the ground points only because we were interested in the hydrogeomorphological variable. So what is the bottom? What does the topography look like? So we can use things like curvature and slope and hydro-conditioned DMs and things like that to figure out what areas would be more likely to have a wetland. So we did DSMs and DTMs and a bunch of other topographic indices, as well as canopy height models, to help us essentially tell the difference between a forested wetland and a scrub wetland and just a grassy kind of wetland. And all of that stuff got stacked into a giant multi-dimensional raster And then we did random forest classifications on that, and I'll talk about all of that in a bit. So with similar to what Jamie here was describing, that that LiDAR data pre-processing it goes through several steps. And we do have to do the IMU and the GNSS and all of that coupling and all of that good stuff, because we have a static LiDAR collection going on the ground. And then we have the drone up in the sky, essentially collecting its own INS and IMU type data. So we have to kind of couple those together. Then we constrain the LiDAR cloud to our GCPs, which on average we would have 8 to 10 of them. And then we would generate our point clouds in LAS format. And so this was about 2 or 3 different software packages here. And you'll see a cute, this is one from Surf City, from a place we surveyed here in Surf City. There's an emergent wetland, there's some scrub up there, and some forested palustrin. I don't know, I sound funny. I have an accent. I am saying PFO for those of you who and then so then again, we took this into Cloud Compare, another software open software package, to essentially divide up that point cloud and extract only the ground returns, right? Because we are getting a full swath return there. And we would essentially do an inverted cloth simulation filter. We flip the point cloud on its back essentially and just take the bottom, the returns. And that's when we bring that stuff into our GIS, because we are at the NCAUG here. So I have to talk about, right? I have to give Esri their credits. We do use a lot of that. So we bought these point clouds then into Arc Pro, and we did all the other stuff to prepare the respective variables for input into the random forest model. So everything was rasterized. The digital elevation model, DSMs, and so on. And then for the multispectral data, as I said, the same kind of process. We did post-processing kinematic to essentially increase the accuracy of our data. And then we created reflectance maps, which were calibrated to reflectance targets that we took data for in the field, and then created these. So that's what our original multispectral bands look like. And then, as I said, from that, so from the LiDAR data, we derived topographic indices such as smoother DM, hydroconditioned DM, aspect slope, curvature, profile curvature. So all the things that will tell us again about where we have topographic depressions and the more likelihood to have a wetland. And then from the multispectral data, we made these indices such as the normalized difference vegetation index, so NDVI, normalized difference red edge, and normalized difference water index. And then all of these were stacked together like that. We did all of these different, we did a lot of modeling and a lot of different combinations, but I'll only be talking about the one where we did multi-classes. Because this, so we initially, we wanted to use ArcGIS Pro to do the random forest, the classification, because we can, it's possible. However, these data were so big, by the time you made these multi-band stacks, and because the UAS data is so high resolution, we're talking about on the order of a few inches, with a vertical accuracy of about 4 centimeters, and a positional horizontal accuracy also very good, about 8 to 10 centimeters. The data was way too big, so we actually had to use a high performance computing H2O package in R, which is a statistical programming language, and we ran our models in that. I'm not going to go into too many details, just to say that we essentially, through those big stacks, broke them up into these different folds or sub-models and ran them separately, and then kind of aggregated together. And that's called cross-validation. So we did cross-validation of these models against our field data. So this was all happening against our field collected data. So what did we find? We found, oh, this is my slide where I did want to show you that on average, we had, so this is kind of comparing your point spacing for, say, the QL2 LiDAR data, right? So the statewide quality level 2 LiDAR data, which say would have a point spacing of 2 meters on average, or less than a meter in some places. But then with our LiDAR data, we would get a point spacing of 0.08 meters. So much better. But then everything, like I said, got rasterized. So our raster resolution that went into these models was on average 0.4, 0.12. So you can kind of see what those are. Yes, 5 minutes. Anyways. Moving along. So what do we find? So on the left here, and this is kind of covering up the way that I put these maps together, is that down here is the NWI data. So National Wetlands Inventory data showing that there's a wetland here, a PFO wetland, and nothing else, right? And the rest is non-wetland is what I should say, and water. The DOT had done a survey here, and they had these 2 pockets of wetland identified. Yeah, I know. But that's what we worked with. And then we did all of the magic that I told you about, and we actually predicted that the presence of a palustrine forested wetland, we can pick up the water, and then we are even able to differentiate, to break up the non-wetland classes into non-wetland open. So this would have been it. It's just essentially fields. Unfortunately, you can't see it very well here. And then the darker gray is a non-wetland, but not open. So it was essentially trees, but they weren't the wetland. On average, the overall accuracy for these 4 sites I'm presenting was between 78 and 84% overall. And then so that's kind of how the sort of answering our first question, are these accurate? How do they compare to existing data? And then what are the important variables? And for palustrine forested wetlands, the most important variable always came up to be the CHM, the canopy height model. So that calculating that variable from the LiDAR data was the #1 predictor of there being a forested wetland, which makes sense. And then I have some specific class sensitivities, but I'm sorry, you can't read it here. So here we had it broken, and I can't see it, so I couldn't tell you which one's which right there. But that's your class level. So the ability of the model to correctly predict that class from among the other classes. For mixed wetlands, so a wetland type where we had a lot of forested wetland. Again, forested is the dark green. But also we had some of the scrub, a little bit of it. So this is the National Wetlands Inventory data. This is the DOT wetland map, much better. But still, you see the difference there between a field collected delineation that costs way, way more than the UAV collected data. So then we're able to predict the existence of that E2EM, so the estuarine intertidal wetland up there. For these types of wetlands, the DEM and the DSMs are our top variables. So those variables are important to, followed by an NDVI as the third. So that's the vegetation index. Yes, I'm almost done. For emergent wetlands, which is, this is a location in Masonboro Island. The DOT hadn't surveyed that, but we wanted to see how an open intertidal type of system would do. And it did really well. This was our highest model. It was close to 90% accuracy. And again, you can see the DEM and the DEM and the NDVI being important variables to predict these estuarine wetlands. And for a palustrine emergent wetland, such as we flew down at River Road, this was the DOT delineation. So they had a small delineation along the road because they were putting a bridge in here. So they had to do the delineation. And we predicted this one really well too. As you can see up there, and here, in these types of wetlands, the NDWI, so the normalized difference water index, and the NDVI were the most important. And I'm going to end here. Oh gosh, that looks weird. That didn't look like that for me. And these were all the 10 sites we surveyed with their relative accuracies. As like I said, they were between about 78 and 80% and then there were places where, again, this is a DOT delineation. This is a spot down at Carolina Bays down in Brunswick County. And we did pretty, no, that was Castle Bay, anyways. So the main challenge was really the computation space and time that it took to do all of these. And I will conclude on the fact that LiDAR collected from a drone when coupled with multispectral data collected from a drone. So the survey was done exactly at the same day over the same area. They do pretty well in predicting wetland type, especially if you have additional training data. And the most important variables are those ones derived from the DM and the DSM. And when we have forested or scrub type wetlands, the canopy height models are important because they can help discern between those classes. And finally, the estuarine sites, which makes a bit of sense, that don't have a lot of canopy are actually going to have we had the easiest time classifying those, even despite the tidal fluctuations. And then, of course, many other classifiers that we could try out there. And I'm happy to report that we worked with a team of high school students who did a bunch of gradient boosting and extreme boosting, and they're publishing that paper very soon. So those kids on all of these data. So there's high school students that have learned and worked with these data sets that are publishing a paper. And I asked them, it's like, how in the world do high school students, are they expected to publish a paper? They really want to get it published so they can go to college. And I'm like, well, since when do kids in high school feel like they have to publish a paper? Those of you grad students who didn't, oh my gosh. And I think that's all I had. Yes, that's all I had. I do want to thank the DOT and all of the folks, and some of them are in this room, who went out and helped us collect these data. And I'll take any questions. Yes. No, they like I said, they took the. Oh yes. So the question was whether the DOT is looking at implementing this across the state, and the answer is yes, I believe so. They're very excited about the results, and the NC DOT is actually one of the most on the cutting edge, especially when it comes to UAS data, just because of the state we live in. So they're very keen on this. And in fact, they're so keen that they gave me another project that started last month to now assess the efficacy of topobathymetric LiDAR for mapping bathymetry. So yes. Yes, that's why I didn't spend too much time, but when we did all of our accuracy assessments, everything was done relative to NCS ASPRS standards. So our vertical accuracy for the LiDAR data was less than 4 centimeters. Otherwise, we didn't accept it. Yes. Oh, sorry. So he asked about standards and how we assess the accuracy, and then about soil samples missing from these kinds of UAV assessments. Well, that's really what we wanted to see is can we get close to some of the delineations that are time intensive, that do the hydric and the soil and the vegetation assessments all right. And no, we're not doing the soils, but we could throw soil data into a random forest model and predict that way if we had, Sergo data and do that. But it's getting us close enough. It's getting you to 80+% of what field delineation would get you. And that's what they wanted to know, is how close does it get you to that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. How does the Army Corps feel about this? It is their decision if they accept it. And honestly, we just did the research, and the DOT is now taking this, and it is not. So what we did is we didn't have a PLS on the team, right? Because this is all done for research purposes and planning purposes. But the division of aviation and their photogrammetry and that division at DOT is also on board. So it's up to them to kind of pass it through the right permits to make it used. But other states use UAV data as well for this purpose. Any other questions? All right, I think I'm done. Thank you very much.